Welcome back to our discussion on the MVC design pattern, which is used by ASP.NET. Today we will focus on the view component of MVC. Let's look again one more time at our diagram here. Again, the user interfaces with the controller. Last time we discussed the controller, we kind of have an understanding how that works. Reminder that the controller talks to the model. The model usually retrieves the data from the SQL database. The database model is then passed back to the controller. Again, we saw that last week. And the controller will determine which view to call so that the web browser can render the view back to the user. Okay. The purpose of the view, obviously, is to provide the interface to the user. This is what the user sees, and oftentimes this is what the user thinks is the program. Not always understanding that behind the view, there's a lot of activity going on between the controller and the model. So the controller determines the content, also known as the model. The controller then chooses the view. The controller passes a model or data content to the view, and the view determines how to render the content. Now keep in mind with this design pattern, a view knows nothing about any other view. Okay, it only knows what it gets from the controller. So the view then takes the model, transforms or repurposes it, usually via HTML. Also may add in grids and buttons and images and other controls to the screen so the user has a nice experience. The view can even determine the language. We won't be doing that in this course, but it can be done. Now, if you're familiar with web forms, in a web form like an ASP.NET, ASPX model, that determines the file that will be used, and the IIS controller determines which file. That's not how MVC works. Again, the user interfaces with the controller. Okay, let's take a look at the home index view. You remember from our web browser interface last week, we have a home component over here. So if you go to the home page, there's an index file. And notice that except for these first 3 lines up here, everything else in here is pure native HTML. So forget the first 3 lines for now, and just notice that we have regular old HTML. Now if we look at so that's the code behind the index.cs HTML. This is C# HTML. Which means it's a combination of both C# code and HTML code. For now, we have no C# code except for these 3 lines here. So now let's look at our controller. And in our controller, we have a method or an action called index. Here is the code for the index. The index calls the view. The view is down here, which is the index under the home folder of the view. So if we run this home page, let's take a look now at the about page here. So here's how the about page looks. If you run the application and click on about, this is what we see. Now notice this code part right here, your application description page. This is data that comes from the controller. So let's go look at the controller. This is the about method in the controller, and notice it has a viewBag.message here, where the value of that is your application description page, and then we call the view. In the view down here, the view sees the viewBag.message and displays it as an H3 tag. Notice also we have @ here. We'll discuss those in a little more detail in a few minutes. So this is the controller. Controller sets the viewBag message. The view takes the viewBag message and wraps an H3 tag around it. And that's how we got our part here. All right, let's move on. Now here is the view folder. So how does the controller know which view to call when all it does is return the view? We go back up a slide. This just says return view. Over here I have a whole bunch of views. How does it know which view to render? If you notice here, we have this class called homecontroller.cs, and in this class homecontroller.cs we have 3 methods. Also notice with the home we have a view with the same name as home. Okay, so here's our home controller, and it has a folder in the view with the same name as the controller, less the word controller. Now under view we have the home folder, which matches up with the class name up here under the controller. Each controller action, for example index, about, and contact, have corresponding files down here, CS HTML files. All right, let's go over that one more time. So the controller named home has a folder under views with the same name minus the word controller. Home, home. In here, in the C# code, we have 3 methods, index, about, contact, and they match up with the 3 views down here. So when we say return view, the index will look down here for an index, about will look for an about, and contact looks for contact. That's how this all is glued together. Okay, so let's modify our about page. I'm going to add a line of code here called viewBag.employees. Notice I can name this anything I want. As I did up here, I can name this anything I want. And it's just going to be a simple array of strings: James River, Maggie Walker, Skipwith, and Huguenot. All right, so this is my controller. Let's look at the about CS HTML and notice that we have the employees here matching up with the viewBag employees down here. Now this is my C# HTML. Again, it's a mixture of C# and HTML code. Here we have some HTML. Here we have a UL, which is HTML for unordered list. We have a line of C# code here. We put the @ sign in front of it. This tells the engine that this is C# code. Treat this like C#. This is a regular for each in C#. The data type is dynamic, and we'll discuss that later. And we have viewBag employees down here. So we want each employee, which is a string here. And we're going to wrap those around a LI, which is a line item as part of an unordered list. And all we're going to do is take this EMP value, for example, James River, and put it inside the LI. All right, so we have the @ sign here. Anytime we want to identify this as being a C# code or variable, all we have to do is put the @ sign in front of it. And let's take a look at how our results look. Here's our page. We have introducing our employees, and there are our 4 employees wrapped around a UL, and each one of these is a unordered list line item. All right, let's take just a sneak peek at the model. Notice one thing. I'm sorry, this is similar. We're going to, instead of using a viewBag dot something, we are going to use a variable called employees, and the var means it will determine what this data type is at compile time, so we know that it is a array of strings. Now, this time we will pass the model, which is this array here, to the view. Remember before we set a viewBag.employees up here. This time we're going to create a crude little model and pass it to the view. Okay, so now the view is expecting a variable here where before it was, let me go back up a little bit. Remember before we just passed a view and we did not pass a model to it. Go back to our code. And now we see this time we're changing it by passing the model to the view. All right, let's look at our about CS HTML file. We add this line up here for model. We identify the model as a type of string array. And now, instead of using viewBag.employees, we use model. This model here is determined by the data type up here. Notice up here, this is at lowercase model. That's important. Down here, notice there's no @ sign here. It is uppercase model. And it doesn't need the @ sign here because it has the @ sign there. That's just 2 ways to do the same thing. One uses a viewBag, the other uses a model. Now, next time we'll spend the whole lesson talking about models. Talking about models. I just want to show you how we pass a model to a view. If we look at the results, it's identical to what it was before. We have our 4 employees listed here. Okay, so we have a strongly typed model because we use the array. That means IntelliSense works within the view, whereas if you're using the viewBag, you remember our data type for the viewBag was dynamic. Dynamic says it will not resolve the properties at compile time. It will do that at runtime. And we'll save that for a lesson on models. Just wanted to show you how that worked. All right, viewBag versus view data. All data passed from controllers to view is actually through something called a view data dictionary. So these 2 things are the same. We have the viewBag.message. It's the same as the index value here of view data with the brackets and the word in quotes message. This is strong. These 2 are the same. They have the same value. They both work the same way. Okay, viewBag values are stored as dynamic data types. Again, dynamic properties are determined at runtime. When I do the compiler, if I have a dynamic data type, I can put anything I want in as a property name, and the compiler does not care, or the do build, it does not care. At runtime, it does care. If that name is invalid, it will throw an exception. This doesn't mean anything to us now, but dynamic data types cannot be passed as parameters to extension methods. You remember from C#2, we had extension methods. Notice how these things come back to haunt us? For now, this does not really mean much, but later on, we'll dig more into that. Okay, so how do we add a view? There's several ways to add a view. I'm going to show you one way for now. So step one is we right-click on the student folder under Views. We right-click and we add View. You can't see it here, but under there is the word Student. And remember we had a folder from before. We created a new controller called Student. We add a view under the Student folder for View. We select MVC View. You may have other options here. You may only have the one depending what else you have in your Visual Studio, but we want MVC View. Later on, when later releases of MVC come out, you may have different options, but for now, this is what we have. Okay, let's name the view Schedule. So when we add the view, we put the name Schedule in here, leave these empty, and we'll check Layout Page. We'll talk about Layout Pages in a few minutes. But for now, just check that. Leave it empty. We'll look at that again later. And then click Add. All right. Now we have the view added to our View folder. We need to go back to our Student controller now and add a new action. And this name here must be the same name as the view. For now, we're going to pass it an ID of int. This will be the student ID, so we can see the schedule for the student. But for now, we're not worried about that. We're just going to have return view. Okay. Let's right-click on the view and click Schedule, the one we just added. And you'll notice we get some nasty looking code here. You can read all that if you want, but primarily what it's saying here, this is our URL. So we're going to this URL. We're saying student schedule. If you remember we had that ID in there. So it's looking for the ID, which we did not pass to it. So it's saying, I'm looking for an integer. You did not give me one. I'm going to throw some nasty looking stuff at you. Now let's just modify our URL. We'll put a slash, put any number you want. I'm going to put the number 5. We don't do anything with it anyway. So it doesn't matter as long as it's a number, as long as it's an integer number. Now after we run this, we don't get much, but we do get the word schedule. So we can see that it did work. Now one of the nice things about MVC, especially MVC 5, I think I saw this with MVC 3, but MVC 5, they polished it even more, is we have this view engine called Razor. Now there are two choices you have. One is Razor, and I forget the other. I think it's Web Forms or something. But forget Web Forms. That's for people who are buried in the 1990s, and that's the way they do things. But this year, well into the 21st century, we're going to use the Razor view engine. We'll talk about a little bit. Web Forms we want to avoid. It carries a lot of junk, and we don't want junk. So we're going to forget Web Forms. We're going to focus on the Razor engine. Next few slides, we'll talk about Razor. Nice thing about it is it's clean, it's lightweight, and it's simple to use. You've already seen some examples of it. So the benefits are it minimizes the code. It blends a little bit of C# with HTML. And the scary part, I don't know if it's scary or not, the nice part is it is uncannily smart. It's designed, well designed to be intuitive. All right. So let's talk about some Razor expressions that we have. We're going to add a new method called Transcript. I forgot to show you how to do that, but just add a new view, call it Transcript. This is the code for it. And I'll show you the code for the transcript in a little bit. This is the code. We're going to create a two-dimensional string array called transcript. Each one will be a course, the semester the student took the course, and the grade the student received. Okay? So we created in our controller, we created a new method under student controller, called it transcript, and we added this code here. Again, this is just a simple two-dimensional array, and we take that transcript and we pass it to the view. So this will be our model. There's our model, and then here is calling the view, passing our model to this transcript. Now let's take a look at the view. This is the transcript CSHTML file. Notice how modeled here, the data type matches our data type in the view, in the controller. So these two match. For now, let's keep it simple. We're just going to display how many courses the student has taken. We're going to take the model here. This time we have to put the @ sign in front of it. And we say length, which tells us how many. So if we look at our output, we have 3 courses. All right. Looks like I had some more Razor expressions. Again, we're going to add a mixture of C# and HTML. This is our transcript code for the view. This is what we had before. The stuff that's highlighted here is what we're adding. Keep in mind, our model is a two-dimensional string array. We're going to add our UL like we did before. We're going to add our for each like we saw before with the about. This time we say for each transcript in the model. And we're going to have an LI here. We're going to do sub-0, which if I remember right was the name of the course. We're going to put 3 spaces in between. We're going to have sub-1, which was the semester the course was offered. And we're going to have 3 more spaces, and we'll have the grade, which is sub-2. So for each course, which is the first one of these up here, we're going to pass, and the second one of these are these 3 values here. All right, so here is our for each. Again, we're grabbing these. Then it's going to grab each one of these. Sub-0, sub-1, and sub-2. And let's take a look at this. Remember we had our 3 courses from before. Here is our result. Remember this is an unordered list. We took the model from the controller, which was a two-dimensional array. There's each dimension and each row, and then each column. So Razor makes that simple for us. We just create the model, and we have access to it. Notice too how Razor intelligently understands what is C# and what is HTML. Without the developer, which is you and me, having to demarcate it. You gotta love it. All right, let's look at some more Razor expressions. Here we have, remember the @ sign means it is C# code. But my name, Robert Dust, is not C# code. What we're trying to do here is we're really trying to show the @ sign because this is a Twitter handle. So my Twitter handle is @RobertDust, and we want the @ to show up, but this confuses the Razor model because it's saying, well, wait a minute, @ means a C# variable of some kind, and I don't recognize that. So if you really want to display the @ sign, all we have to do is make two of them. So now Razor sees @ and says, oh, I know what we're talking about. This is really the @ sign. Let's take a look at this. And now we see the Twitter handle with the @ sign, which is what we want to show. Let's look at another example. Let's look at email. So here's the Twitter. Here's the email. Now, email really does have an @ sign in it, typically, or maybe always. When we have the name and then the domain name here. So in this case, we want the @ sign. Also notice in this case that Razor has figured out, remember I told you how it's uncannily smart? It has figured out that this really is an @ sign because it's part of an email. So it scanned that, figured it out, and now we don't have to do anything special. There is our email address. All right. So a lot of times we're going to have data input from our users, and they're going to type in data and pass it to us. There's something called Crosssite Script injection. That's what SS stands for. It's hard to say. Crosssite Script injection. And somebody can put some code like this in there. This is not too bad. This is just a little JavaScript putting an alert sign up. You've been hacked. And then close the script. They can put that in there. We inadvertently run this and find out we've been hacked. All right. Now I made this kind of simple. Instead of having input box, I just typed the message in here. But imagine this had been typed in by a not so nice user. Now, nice thing about it is Razor recognizes this. It says, that ain't going to happen on my watch. So it runs this. It just says, all right, I realize it's JavaScript. I'm not going to run it. I'm just going to display it. So we foiled the hacker. All right, again, Razor is smart enough to figure that out. Okay, a few more things. Let's look at comments, asterisks, everything between that and the opposite of that, which is a reverse of it, is asterisk @ is a comment. So the stuff in green here is a comment. Notice below here, we have @ open curly brace. Everything between that and the closed curly brace, it recognizes as a code block of C# code. Now I got my string message in here. I can do some calculations. I can do whatever I need in here. And the Razor engine understands all that. It's beautifully well thought out. You're going to love using this. All right. So again, there's my code block. There's my comment. Comment just kind of faded out on us. You see the difference? At asterisk begins and an asterisk at terminates. At open curly to close curly. Just everything in here is C# code. I don't have to put the ats inside of everything else. It knows it. All right, early on we talked about layouts. We created a view, then we talked about layouts. If you're familiar with other tools, they have things similar to master pages and other I don't know what Dreamweaver calls it, but they have master pages where you can have a common look and feel throughout your website. MVC provides that. It gives us a consistent look. You can create layouts for the entire website or just portions of it. If you got some portions of your site that you don't want to have all the menu options, for example, at checkout, usually things get real simple if they don't want to distract you. Layouts contain placeholders where our views can plug code into the layout. So if you go to your Visual Studio Solution Explorer, over here under Views, there is a folder called Shared, and under Shared is a file named _layout CSHTML. This is mostly this is pure HTML. There's a little bit of stuff in here. We're going to ignore that. A little bit more down there. We're going to ignore that. And then here we have something called render body. So everything above this and below this is part of our layout. This render body part here is where our view code will go inside of the master code. So think of this kind of like an abstract class for your view. You can have multiple sections in here. Here we have one called scripts. You can have filters, you can have carts, you can have all kind of fun stuff, status maybe. So you can add different sections in here and your view knows what these sections are and will fill them in accordingly. Let's talk about the sections a little bit. Every section in a layout must have a value unless you say required equal false. Actually, colon. Required value is false. If you have this, it says, all right, you don't have to have this. If you don't have it, we won't do anything. What you can do, this is a nice little feature. What you can do is you can say, all right, in my layout, I have a section called footer. If that is defined from the view, then render it here. If the view did not include one, then the default will be a copyright notice. It's a little chunky, I know, but it does work. So if they provide one, we'll render whenever they provide it. If they did not provide one, then we'll just put in our own copyright notice here. Not too bad. Okay, so the problem we have now is we have to now add that layout view to every view we have so the view will know which layout to use. Unless we have this piece of code here called view start or underscore view start. Underscore view start, I'm sorry. So this keeps us from having to define the layout on every view we have. We can have a default here have this default. It says, look, if we don't give you one, use the one from the shared folder here. If you remember, when we add the view, the little line down here, it's kind of hard to read. I'll read it for you. It says, leave empty if it is set in eraser underscore view start file. So if we set it in the view start file, and that's the default, then we don't have to set it on this page here. If you want to override that, you would click on the button here and choose the layout that you want. Nice little system. And this code here runs before any view, so you can be assured that your view will use the proper layout. All right. A couple more things will be done. Let's talk about partial views. Now we're going to spend a whole week, I believe, talking about partial views. But I just want to introduce you to it because it is an important component of views. Now the common naming convention for a view, again, we like we did before, we do a right click and add. The common naming convention is to put an underscore in front of the view name. So you don't have to, and sometimes you see people who don't do it. I like doing it. For one thing, when you look at all of your in your controller, when you're looking at your views, your action results, all your views will float to the top because that underscore puts it at the top of the sort sequence. We'll see that later when we talk about partial views for sure. So we put the underscore in front and we check this box here, create as partial view. Now when we do that, all of this grays out. Why? Why? Because this is determined by the main view. So what a partial view is, it is a small section of your page. Usually it's small, it can be big. Usually it's a small section of your page, and when it's rendered, it doesn't render the entire page. It just renders that small part of it. Again, we'll spend more time on this later on, so that may not make a lot of sense to you yet, but think of this as a, I don't know if you know what Ajax is or not, but it's an Ajax-like part of your screen, so not the whole screen is rendered. Okay? So remember the transcript we had? This is our view we had called transcript. We had a bunch of code in here before about creating that two-dimensional array. All right, we're going to modify this, take out all the other code, and just say return view. Then we're going to add a new action result called underscore transcript. Again, we have the ID, so we'll know which student we're talking about. And this is the code we had before. Notice now that instead of returning a view, we return what? A partial view. Remember, a partial view is a small set of a page. And we pass it the model, again, of a two-dimensional string array. So let's look at, this is our view for the partial view, underscore transcript. Notice we have a model like we did before, where we pass it the two-dimensional string array. Everything else is the same as what it was. All this code here is what we pilfered from the transcript view. So now we have a small portion of our page that is determined by whatever we put in the partial view. Remember our transcript? So a transcript, we pass it the int. The model is an int. And instead of all that code we had before, we will just call the partial view called transcript. And we're going to pass it the student ID number to the model, as the model here, to the controller, just for the small part of the page. All right. Now there's a little more code here we had before. I'm not going to show you that. But here's the result. So this code here in the green box came from the partial view. So the benefits of the partial view, one, it makes our code reusable. If we want to display the transcript in another view somewhere else, we have the code already developed, and all they have to do is pull in the partial view. So we can reuse our code, which is a nice thing. Also makes our code modular, in that we can identify our main view here as having components of various partial views built in. That makes our code easier to maintain, and it makes our code easier to understand. It also improves our user experience, because if, for example, the student's transcript changed while they're viewing this little part of code here will be updated, not the whole page. So it gives us AJAX power in our view here. All right, so that concludes this lesson on views. We covered a lot. We know that views render the model to the end user. It converts the C# code into HTML. Using Razor, we can combine C# with HTML. Later on, we'll also add CSS, jQuery, and other things. Razor has a nice, rich, intelligent, IntelliSense-aware environment. It's not exactly like C#, but it's real close to it. There's a few C# things you cannot do in Razor, but not too many. All right, and partial view simplify development while providing a pleasant user experience. So that's it for this lesson here. Next time we'll talk about the model. Hope this is helpful to you. And until next time, this is Bob Dust, and I'll see you later.